I am truly happy to have them with me.
In a desolate stretch of the snowbound north, where the wind cuts like cold blades and the snow never truly melts, a man lives alone in a wooden cabin. No phone, no internet, no one waiting for him, but the forest and frozen memories. His name is Owen Hale, a man who once had everything and lost it all. A biologist who walked away from the civilized world, carrying a shattered heart and a life that seemed to have ended, disappearing into the wilderness as if to vanish entirely. But then, on a winter's day, two tiny wild creatures, a lynx, white as moonlight, and a bobcat, the color of fire and rust, appeared. And they didn't just change Owen's life, they challenged modern biology itself, defying everything we thought we knew about instinct and the wild. They didn't just survive, they chose to love, and they chose to stay. This is not a story about raising wild animals, not some cute video for social media. This is a modern and true legend about a friendship beyond species, a love that healed deep grief, and a decision that forced the government to rewrite its own laws. If you've ever believed that only humans are capable of love, stay with us until the very end. You'll never look at the world or yourself the same way again. Before we begin, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you never miss a story. The wind blew like a cold, patient sculptor. It howled through the dense pine forests of Lapland, carving across snow-covered hillsides, leaving behind ghostly shapes like art made from the breath of an ice god. The birch branches shivered, bare and brittle, like ancient bones in a white robe. For Owen Hale, it was just another ordinary day. The solitary man lived in a small cabin at the forest's edge, built from pine logs he had hewn with his own hands, its roof sagging under the weight of snow, like a warning from time itself. There was no phone signal, no internet, nothing but the crackle of firewood and the scent of pine sap clinging to the breath. It was Owen's final fortress, holding off not just the harshness of the wild, but a world he no longer wished to belong to. He hadn't come to this isolation by choice. He came because he had no other choice. 5 years earlier, a slick patch of road near Oslo had taken from him his wife Elena and their young son Maxim. The accident happened in the blink of an eye, but it left behind in Owen a silence that stretched into eternity. The quiet that followed their deaths was like a sorrowful symphony without end, pushing him away from every word of comfort, every sympathetic glance, every memory of a life that had once held happiness. Owen had once been a zoologist, specializing in Arctic wildlife, a man of science and ecosystems. But now, he was just a shadow in the forest, living like an old forest healer for creatures no one remembered. With a long-held wildlife rehabilitation license, he tended to injured foxes, lost snowy owls, and sometimes reindeer shivering in the frost. It was the last purpose he had left, a fragile thread of responsibility that kept him from falling fully into the abyss of grief that never truly healed. The storm came without warning, a white fury that lasted 2 days and 2 nights, blanketing the forest and the valleys beneath it with a suffocating layer of snow. Trees bent, horizons disappeared, and the world lost all sense of direction. When the sky finally cracked open with a sliver of light, the entire landscape looked wrapped in a thick, pale shroud, a funeral veil of cold and silence. Owen, sensing something was wrong, laced up his snowshoes and stepped out from the cabin. This forest was his silent sanctuary, a place where he buried memories and rebuilt broken beliefs. And he knew, like a shepherd of the wild, he had to see if any creature still needed his hands that day. What he didn't expect was to find something that would forever change his seemingly permanent isolation. He hadn't gone more than a mile from the cabin when he saw it. A massive Norwegian spruce, one he often used for navigation, now laid flat, snapped by the storm's merciless force. Its giant trunk sprawled across the snow trail, like an accidental tombstone made of wood and ice. Beneath its tangled branches, where the snow hadn't yet fully covered, a patch of pale, tawny fur peeked through the white. Owen's heart, once slow and heavy like an old clock, skipped, then thundered. Carefully, he stepped forward, his snowshoes crunching the powder beneath, leaving marks like claw trails through the drift. There, under the twisted branches, was a female Scandinavian lynx, her tufted ears now limp, motionless. The cold had taken her life, no signs of struggle, no cry, only silence. A thick branch had crushed her side, a tragedy common in these untamed lands. Owen bowed his head, about to turn away. He murmured a soft goodbye, a quiet ritual he had learned to offer death. And then he heard it, a sound so faint it would have been carried off by the wind had he not been still. He dropped to his knees, sinking into the snow, and began digging frantically around the lynx's body. His hands, large and calloused by frost, were clumsy, desperate. And then he saw it, a tiny creature, no bigger than a snowball, that breathed, curled tightly against its mother's frozen side. Too small to survive. A lynx cub, its leucistic white fur almost glowing, a heartbreaking contrast against the snow. Its eyes cloudy, not fully opened, stared up at Owen, with a kind of instinctive plea for help. Its tiny frame trembled violently, each breath a battle. Without hesitation, Owen yanked down the zipper of his storm parka. He slipped his hands inside, gently cradling the cub, who let out a weak cry, its baby claws catching on the wool lining of his sweater. He pulled the tiny body into his chest, into the lingering warmth of a heart he thought had long since gone cold. He zipped up the coat, holding the cub like a fragile secret carried through the long winter. It was small, so small it barely filled the space of his two cupped hands. A lost life, just like his own. "You're safe now, little one," Owen whispered, his voice hoarse. An old feeling, long buried beneath snow and silence, rose like breath after a long sleep. "I've got you." As Owen stood up, hands shielding his fingers still numb from digging through snow, a faint movement near the base of the fallen spruce stopped him in his tracks. In a shallow dip of snow, almost completely hidden beneath a cracked slab of bark and a tangle of broken branches bent like a frozen canopy, another creature lay curled motionless, but breathing. But this time, it wasn't a lynx. Its fur was a warm reddish brown, streaked with dark spots and stripes, unmistakable markings. Its eyes, unlike the clouded gaze of the first cub, were clear and burning bright, like two pieces of polished amber awakened in a sea of white. A European wildcat, elusive, rare, and wild to the bone. It was slightly larger than the snowy lynx cub, and though its body trembled in visible waves, its stare radiated the full force of survival instinct. Owen stood frozen, eyes narrowing, part astonishment, part confusion. A Scandinavian lynx and a wildcat together beneath the same dead lynx mother? There was no field manual for this. In the wild, even where their ranges overlapped, they never shared dens. They were competitors, two divergent rhythms of the forest's ancient heartbeat. Owen scanned the area. No tracks, no signs of a wildcat mother. Perhaps she had been swept away by the storm. Or perhaps she too was buried somewhere, deep beneath the snow. Whatever the reason, this small body was now alone, just as vulnerable, just as close to death as the lynx cub. Just as Owen had once been, the wildcat cub hissed, a soft snarl, like wind funneling through a flute, not threatening, but stubborn to the very tip of its fur. Owen's heart, already cracked open by the lynx cub, shattered completely. He couldn't leave it behind. He wouldn't. He knelt again, lowering his hand, palm open. And in a blend of Finnish and English, the mix that had become his inner language, he whispered, as if soothing not the cub, but himself. "Hey there, little warrior. It's okay now. You're safe." The cub let out another faint growl, swiping toward him. A miniature predator trying to defend a territory that no longer existed. But the fight was short-lived, overwhelmed by cold, hunger, and aching loneliness. Owen gently lifted the cub. It was wiry, solid, a compact knot of muscle and bone. He pulled aside the other flap of his coat, nestling it in, opposite the sleepy lynx cub. A low vibration, half growl, half snowstorm engine hum, buzzed softly against his chest. He zipped the jacket all the way to his chin. Now, Owen Hale was a living incubator, carrying within him two wild lives, two natural rivals, now huddled side by side, sharing the warmth of a heart that had once believed it had nothing left to give. Then he turned and began the slow, steady walk home, through the vast white silence of the forest. On the way back to the cabin, Owen could feel every breath pressing beneath the thick fabric of his coat. But what weighed against his chest wasn't just the physical presence of two tiny bodies curled close for warmth. It was the weight of responsibility, of a future he had never asked for, of two lives delivered into his hands, twice, at once, without warning, without permission. And in the biting cold of Lapland, where every feeling seemed frozen in time, a flicker of warmth appeared not from flesh, but from a deep, hidden place in the heart he once thought had stopped longing for connection. Right then, beneath the silver-gray sky and the splintered pine trees, he decided to name them. The tiny white lynx, delicate and silent, her fur like suspended fog, caught between moonlight and snow, would be called Freya, a whispered homage to the goddess of beauty and life, a symbol that even what is fragile can endure death and still survive. The second creature, fierce, alert, and brimming with instinct, would be Ember, because of the way her fur burned like copper in the winter forest, because of the steel in her eyes, because her heart beat to the rhythm of a survivor. Owen glanced down at his coat. A soft rumble, like an old engine hesitantly coming to life after a long winter's sleep, vibrated faintly from both sides of his chest. He kept walking, and for the first time in years, Owen Hale's footsteps were not heavy with the past, but steadied by something beginning to grow inside him. The first week was a brutal trial, pushing Owen to the brink of both body and spirit. Freya and Ember, those two fragile lives, were still far too weak. Their breaths were as thin as early winter mist. Their survival hung by a thread, as if a colder than expected night, or a single missed feeding, would be enough to erase them completely. Owen converted the old storage room into a temporary shelter. He placed a large wooden crate in the center of the room, lined it with worn fleece blankets, and added a moisture-resistant wool layer on top. Overhead, he mounted a makeshift infrared heat lamp, strung up with old hooks and steel wire, adjusting it degree by careful degree, using a temperature gauge he had once used to monitor dens of injured animals. Owen's first call was to Dr. Lindholm, a Swedish veterinarian who lived just across the border, near the town of Kautokino, nearly a 3-hour drive away, assuming the roads weren't buried under snow. The old vet's raspy voice crackled over the landline, which barely held a signal. A lynx and a wildcat? Together? There was a pause, then a dry chuckle, a sound that nearly disappeared into the hiss of falling snow outside the window. Owen, you're not just in trouble. You're carrying 2 biological time bombs inside your jacket. They'll need KMR kitten milk replacer. Special formula. I'll have the vet station in Alta leave a crate for you at the gas stop in Jokmok. And listen, you'll need the patience of Odin. That white lynx? she'll be incredibly picky. And that red wildcat, if you're not careful, she'll eat the entire bottle. Owen didn't laugh. He drove out in a mild snowstorm, navigating the ice-laced forest road to Jokkmokk, tires gripping just enough, instincts working overtime to keep him from sliding off the cliffs into frozen silence. In his mind was another storm: worry, doubt, fear. Not just fear of losing two fragile creatures, but fear of failing again. After daring to hope, when he returned home, the real battle began. Days bled into nights. He set an alarm to wake every 2 hours. Freya and Ember were fed by a tiny syringe, each drop measured meticulously. By day 3, he upgraded to miniature bottles. Ember drank with the ferocity of a predator, nearly sucking the nipple clean off. Freya, in contrast, merely touched her lips to the formula, as if debating whether life was still worth choosing. Owen sat for hours, hands trembling from fatigue as he held the bottles, back against the log wall, ears straining for the faint sounds of swallowing. In a room otherwise completely silent, every drop of milk was a negotiation with death. Owen was exhausted, running on dark coffee and a kind of quiet determination he hadn't realized he still possessed. He had become a father again, a role he thought he had buried beneath the permafrost of his past. And every motion was heartbreakingly familiar. Midnight feedings under dim yellow light, gently wiping the tiny bodies with a warm cloth to mimic a mother's tongue. The constant anxiety, a stream that never stopped running through his thoughts. But this time, the room didn't smell like baby powder. It smelled like the living wild, raw, feral, and unforgettable. The scent of melting snow, cold earth, and animal fur, the purest form of life itself. Once, white nights were symptoms of an old grief. Now, they had purpose. By saving these two fragile lives, Owen was slowly, piece by piece, saving his own. One evening, just over a week later, Freya slipped into a critical state. Her tiny body had gone limp, cold as river stone beneath glacier melt. She refused all food. No cries, no resistance, only a terrifying stillness. Owen sat on the cabin floor, back against the cold wooden wall, cradling Freya in his calloused hands. His eyes, sunken from sleep deprivation, his face etched with raw despair. In his mind, a thought struck like an axe into rotting timber. I'm losing her. Ember, the one who usually wrestled blankets like a miniature warrior, suddenly paused, as if she sensed the unnatural silence. She crawled out of the crate, body wobbly, still learning what it meant to walk. Slowly, she approached Owen's leg, placed her front paws gently on his pant leg, and let out a faint rumble, not threatening, but like the hum of a small motor beneath the floorboards. Soothing, steady, alive. Then she nudged forward, pressed her head against Freya's neck, and released a string of chirps, soft, broken, delicate sounds, like a bird calling through snowfall. Somehow, in response to that primal encouragement, Freya stirred. Her eyes flickered open, still cloudy, but aware. And then, a single sound escaped her. A mule, light as wind passing through the treetops. Owen, eyes stinging with tears, gently brought the bottle close once more. And this time, Freya latched on, weak at first, then stronger, then into a rhythm suckling, steady, real. Ember didn't leave. She stayed pressed against Freya, a tiny fortress of fur, warm and unwavering, as if offering the last of her own heat to the other half of her world. In that moment, Owen understood their survival didn't rest on him alone. It rested on each other. Even if nature had written them as rivals, here, in the corner of a quiet cabin, beneath the dim glow of a heat lamp. They were family. Month passed into month. Then came a full year. The log cabin of Owen Hale, once a fortress of solitude for a shattered heart, had become something else entirely, a playground and a kingdom for two wild creatures growing stronger by the day. Freya, the trembling lynx cub he had once held like a snowflake on the edge of melting, had transformed into a creature of breathtaking beauty. Her white coat shimmered like moonlight scattered across snow. Her tall black-tipped ears stood alert, twitching at every sound, and her massive snowshoe-like paws let her glide silently across deep drifts, like a ghost in the forest. She was the embodiment of grace and mystery, a silent spirit moving like mist between ancient pine trunks. Her eyes, deep and blue as glacial lakes, held a knowing that seemed older than the woods themselves, as if she could see things humans had long forgotten. Freya would sit for hours on the porch railing, watching the world below with regal stillness, a queen of the northern woods wrapped in a cloak of frost and silence. Ember, by contrast, was the spark in the darkness. He was lean muscle and wiry strength, his coat a burnished blaze of russet and bronze, a firelight dancing through the snow and evergreen. Half Freya's size, but twice her defiance. He was mischievous, curious, clever to the point of chaos, constantly plotting his next act of minor rebellion. His mind spun with unsolvable riddles like how to open Owen's dried meat drawer by leaping onto the latch, or how to bite the swinging pendulum of the grandfather clock and dodge before it smacked him in the face. Ember was the court jester to Freya's icy queen, all leaping energy and exuberant meows, while she watched him with a look that was part tolerance, part royal disdain. His wild, lovable chaos was the perfect counterbalance to her poised silence. Their bond was the axis around which their lives revolved. They were rarely more than a few steps apart. Where one went, the other followed, like two halves of the same soul. When they hunted, they became an odd, astonishingly effective team. Freya, the master of ambush, melted into the forest shadows like a spirit, waiting with inhuman patience for snowshoe hares, ptarmigan, or Arctic mice. Ember, who had no interest in patience but plenty of speed, would burst from cover with an explosion of energy, scattering prey straight into Freya's jaws. They shared their catch without a trace of aggression, a sight that would leave any field biologist slack-jawed, questioning entire evolutionary theories. And in the eternal hush of Lapland, where the cold had once killed belief, two natural-born enemies had grown into siblings. And Owen Hale, once a man who lived only to forget, now lived to witness and protect, a miracle he had never asked for. At night, when the wind howled beyond the cabin walls, Freya and Ember would curl into each other on the old reindeer hide rug before the stone hearth. The fire cast flickering amber light over Freya's snow-pure fur and Ember's bronze flame, making them look like creatures born from an old Norse legend. Ember's soft, steady purring was a lullaby, a gentle harmony beside Freya's silent serenity, a music of life, of warmth, of safety. Owen Hale often sat in his weathered oak armchair, an open book resting on his lap, but he rarely read. He simply watched. He watched Freya meticulously clean Ember's ears, like a gentle, older sister tending to her mischievous little brother. And Ember, in turn, would nuzzle beneath her chin with a shameless affection, emitting stuttered, sputtering purrs, like an old motor trying to start. In those moments, the painful silence that once gripped this cabin like a vice was replaced by the soft sounds of love. They had filled the empty corners of this house, and of a heart Owen thought had nothing left to hold. Owen taught them. He took them on long walks through the forest, down mossy trails beneath ancient pines that whispered secrets to the northern wind. He taught them to read the signs of the wild, to tell the scent of deer from the musk of wolves, to read claw marks on bark, and to know whether still snow meant peace or a hidden threat. He never used a leash. He never had to. To Freya and Ember, Owen was not a captor. He was the anchor, the center of their strange little pack. A man, a lynx, a wildcat. 3 beings from 3 different worlds, sharing one home. Owen was the tall, 2-legged creature who gave warmth and food, and above all else, safety. There were no cages, not chains, only trust stronger than rope, deeper than instinct. And that loyalty, that invisible thread that bound their hearts together, would be tested one crisp autumn afternoon. Owen was chopping wood, his silhouette stretched long over the late autumn snow, when the air shifted suddenly, unnaturally heavy. The forest birds fell silent. No flutter, no song, only a stillness so deep it felt alive. He paused, axe in hand, pine sap still glistening on the haft. Then he saw it, a young male brown bear, large, ribbed from hunger, its nose lifted to catch the scent in the wind, lumbered from the birch grove, drawn by the smoked fish Owen had hung from the porch that morning. It was lean, too lean for the season, and its eyes were starving. Not curious, not cautious, just desperate. Owen froze. His heart pounded like a war drum, but his brain screamed out the protocols. Don't run. Make yourself big. Make noise. Don't make eye contact. He inhaled sharply, mouth opening to shout. And then, a streak of burning bronze tore past his legs. Ember. With a snarl so guttural it seemed impossible from his small frame, Ember launched himself toward the bear. Not to attack, but to distract. A psychological assault. A fury in miniature. He darted in, snarled, retreated. Leapt sideways, slashed at the air, charged again. The bear roared, swinging a massive paw. But it hadn't noticed the silence behind it. A pale blur dropped from a low-hanging pine bough. Freya. She landed soundlessly behind the bear, like snow falling in a graveyard. No growl, no hiss, just presence. The arch of her spine, the flare of her whiskers, the glint in her eyes, an avalanche waiting for breath. Stillness was her weapon, her silence, a threat carved from ice. The bear froze. Ahead of it, a shrieking copper demon dancing with death. Behind it, a spectral queen carved from frost and shadow, watching with lethal patience. Too much chaos, too much unpredictability. And bears, they don't gamble. With a frustrated huff, it backed away, then turned and ambled off into the trees, leaving behind churned snow and the ghost of its breath in the frozen air. Ember strutted back like he'd just slain a dragon, his chest puffed out. He rubbed himself against Owen's leg, purring like a chainsaw of victory. Freya emerged moments later, walking from the shadows, with that regal composure, as if she hadn't just stared down death itself. She looked at Owen and blinked slowly, deliberately. A gesture, ancient in feline language, the deepest sign of trust. Owen dropped to his knees, his hands trembling with adrenaline. He ran his fingers through their warm, wild fur, feeling heartbeats, breath, loyalty. For the first time in years, he wasn't the only one doing the saving. They had saved him, but Owen also knew the peaceful life they shared was merely a borrowed gift from nature. As a licensed wildlife rehabilitator, he understood that the ultimate goal was never to keep them, but to return them to freedom. That was the law, and the code of ethics he had trusted his entire life. To hold on to them, no matter how deep his love, would still be selfish. Still, a betrayal of the wildness they were born to belong to. Just thinking about it made Owen's chest tighten, a familiar constriction. A reminder of the loss he thought he'd moved beyond. But he began preparing. For them, and for himself. He started leaving food further from the cabin, letting them hunt alone, encouraging instinct to return. He eased back on affection, stopped calling their names as often, tried to place small, intentional distance between them. Each act, a small betrayal, against his own heart. And then, one day, the outside world knocked. On a strangely warm summer morning, the low rumble of an engine echoed down the dirt path leading to the cabin. A dark green government truck pulled silently into the clearing. A woman stepped out, tall, upright, and sharp as frost. Her uniform bore the crest of the Norwegian Directorate for Environment and Natural Resources Miljødirektoratet. Stiff collar, digital clipboard, a hard notebook tucked under her arm. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice clipped, her eyes sweeping across the area, stopping at the massive feline tracks stamped deep into the damp earth. "We've received reports unverified. Of course that you're cohabiting with 2 adult wild felids." Owen's heart sank. He'd always known this day might come. "They're not cohabiting with me," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I raised them. They were abandoned when they were just days old." "Then the reports are accurate," she replied, unfazed. She pulled out her notebook. Her gaze never left him. "A Eurasian lynx, lynx, and a European wildcat, Felis sylvestris. Both, I presume, now fully grown?" "Yes," Owen said quietly. "Her name is Freya. The boy is Ember." That teen. Ember. A flicker of something confusion, perhaps passed across the woman's face at the mention of names. Then it vanished behind her professional mask. "Mr. Hale, you know the regulations as well as I do," she said. "Wildlife rehabilitation is for the purpose of release. Keeping apex predators in a human environment not only violates conservation law, but is also dangerous for you and for them." "They're not pets," Owen said, his voice rising for the first time. "They're different." "Different how?" she interrupted, unflinching. "They still have teeth, claws, instincts, don't they? They have hearts," Owen wanted to say. "They have memories, trust. They are family." But he didn't say it, because in the eyes of the law, emotion was not evidence. Just then, Ember appeared from the side of the cabin, a Nordic field mouse clamped gently in his jaws. His reddish-brown fur gleamed beneath the morning sun, his amber eyes flicking toward the unfamiliar woman. And then, he stopped. He placed the mouse carefully on the first step of the porch, as though offering a welcome gift. A gesture born of instinct, but delivered with intent. Then he turned to look at Owen, eyes shimmering with unspoken words. "Did I do well?" A moment later, from the edge of the pine forest, Freya emerged. She moved like mist, silent, weightless, as if the earth itself softened beneath her steps. She paid no mind to the stranger, walked directly to Owen, rubbed her head gently against his hand, then lay down by his feet, calm, content, as if she'd done so 100 times before. Dr. Ingrid Halvorsen stood frozen. She had seen animals kept too long in cages. She had seen eyes dulled by confinement or ignited with rage behind steel bars. But this was different. There was no fear, no submission, only trust and affection. An invisible thread bound them, undeniable in its presence. But her professionalism kicked in like muscle memory. Her voice returned, cold and composed, as unwavering as her role within the Directorate of Nature Management. "This situation is highly irregular," she said, jotting something down without looking up. and it cannot continue. They are wild animals, Mr. Hale. They've reached maturity. They must be returned to the wild, where they can find mates, live by their instincts, unbound by human emotion. She closed the notebook with a quiet snap and met Owen's gaze. I'm giving you 1 month. 1 month to prepare, to sever this attachment and release them. I will return on the 25th of September to oversee the process and ensure that everything is done in accordance with conservation laws and protocol. She didn't wait for Owen to protest, didn't allow sentiment to cloud procedure. She turned on her heel, walked back to her vehicle, closed the door, started the engine, and disappeared down the dusty road without a backward glance. And Owen stood there, a wildcat at his side, bearing a silent offering, a lynx curled peacefully at his feet, and a heart barely mended, split open once more. The month that followed became the most agonizing of Owen Hale's life. He lived like a man on death row, marking off each day on the paper calendar beside the wood-burning stove, as though counting down to his own execution. Owen tried to follow Dr. Ingrid Halverson's orders. He began to push Freya and Ember away. No more quiet evenings curled by the fire. No more tug-of-war over blankets. No more gentle purring while he read aloud into the night. Meals were now placed at the forest's edge. He would set the food down without calling, without waiting, and turn his back to the house without a single word. The change broke them. Ember would whine for hours outside the door, scratching lightly at the wood, never angry, never demanding, just a quiet plea, each claw a soft knock against Owen's heart. Freya perched silently on the porch railing, her ice-blue eyes fixed on the bedroom window. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She just waited, with a silence more devastating than any cry. They didn't understand. They couldn't. Why the anchor of their world had suddenly become distant, had turned them away like they were something wrong. For Owen, every whimper, every waiting gaze, was a blade twisting in his soul. This pain, this slow unraveling, was worse than anticipation, because now it was no longer looming. It was real. He was breaking their hearts to try and save them, and he no longer knew whose heart was breaking more. The morning of the 25th of September dawned clear and cold, a breathtakingly beautiful day. But to Owen Hale, it felt like the morning of an execution. Dr. Ingrid Halverson arrived promptly at 9 a.m. with an assistant in tow. They brought 2 large transport crates and tranquilizer equipment, just in case things didn't go smoothly. Are they ready? Her voice asked, softer than before, as though some trace of sympathy had slipped through her professional shell. Owen, his face carved into a mask of cold stone, only nodded. He couldn't bring himself to cage them. They're out back, by the stream. He walked ahead, every step as if dragging a mountain behind him. Freya and Ember were lying in the grass, soaking in the morning sun by the stream, their coats lit gold by the early autumn light, one a streak of fire, the other of melting ice. They looked up as Owen approached, their eyes a mix of hope and unease. It's time. His voice broke like rotted wood. He knelt, unable to resist one final goodbye. He buried his face into Freya's thick fur and whispered, "You have to go now, little girl. You have to be free." Then he turned to Ember, scratching gently behind the ear as he had from the very first day. "You be strong, little warrior. Take care of her." He stood and turned away, not daring to look back. His heart was a cold, hollow space stretching into nothing. He gave Dr. Halverson a faint nod. "They're yours now." The conservation team approached cautiously, according to plan, herding the animals slowly deeper into the forest, away from the house, away from humanity, to where they might truly be wild again. They clapped gently, not threatening, just enough to stir the instinct to move. Freya stood first, regal and composed like a queen of snow. Ember followed, growling softly in his throat, ever the cautious one. They glanced at the strangers, then turned toward the misty forest beyond. For a moment, everything seemed to be going by the book. Freya took a few steps, her paws silent over the grass. Ember trailed her. Owen shut his eyes. A single tear, hot, heavy, stinging, slipped down the dirt-smudged line of his cheek. It was done. Silence was returning. But then, a sharp intake of breath from Dr. Halverson. "I don't believe it." Owen opened his eyes. Frisia had stopped. She stood at the edge of the forest, then turned her head slowly, deliberately. She crossed the clearing, walking past the stunned conservationists, and sat at Owen's feet. She pressed herself into his leg, as if that place was home. Ember, seeing his companion return, abandoned all pretense, dashed back like a furry torpedo, purring like a speedboat engine. He wrapped himself around Owen's legs, rubbing his scent onto the denim, an unmistakable claim of ownership. Then he looked up at Dr. Halverson and let out a chirping, defiant call. Everyone was frozen. This wasn't hesitation. This wasn't confusion. This was a decision, a refusal of freedom. Clear, final, undeniable. They had been given the chance to return to the wild, but they had chosen Owen. Dr. Halverson stood motionless, clipboard hanging forgotten at her side. Everything she had ever learned, from books, from field work, from international conferences, told her this was impossible. Wild animals don't domesticate themselves. They don't form cross-species families. They don't abandon instinct for affection. She stepped slowly toward Owen, but her eyes were not on him. They were on the two magnificent creatures now guarding him, as if he were the most precious thing in their world. She saw the softness in Freya's eyes as they settled on him. She saw Ember nuzzle into his hand. She saw what no manual had prepared her for. She no longer saw a man and two animals. She saw a singular unit, three souls bound as one. "In 20 years in the field," she murmured, "I've never seen anything like this." She looked at Owen, and for the first time, there was no judgment in her gaze. "They can't be released," she said. Not as a concession, but as a statement of fact. It would be a death sentence. They wouldn't survive. Their identity is here, with you. Tears now streamed freely down Owen Hale's face, but they were no longer born of pain. They were tears of release, of overwhelming joy, a feeling he had believed was forever out of reach. He sank to his knees, wrapping his arms around his two companions, the two creatures he had once saved, who had come back to save him. Freya and Ember pressed close, purring in unison, a symphony of reunion, of acceptance, of love. Dr. Ingrid Halverson stood still, watching quietly for a long moment. Her face, once a mask of clinical detachment, softened, bit by bit. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her features, followed by a deep, slow breath, as if she were finally setting down the weight of theory, to bow before a miracle. The shock faded, replaced by awe and reverence. "I'm going to be buried in paperwork for this," she murmured, shaking her head with a faint laugh. "But I know exactly what I'll do. I'll designate this land as a special private sanctuary," she said, her voice now carrying the tone of something sacred. "You'll be its legally recognized guardian for life, and they will be allowed to live here, in peace together, for the rest of their days." The story of the man, the lynx, and the wildcat slowly became a quiet legend in the northern reaches of Lapland. Dr. Halverson's official report, though redacted and trimmed in multiple places, still referenced an unprecedented symbiotic bond that defied every known principle of ecological behavior. Visitors remained rare, a condition Owen insisted upon to protect the purity of the world shared by the three souls. But those few who did make the journey, be they veterinarians, field researchers, or simply lost wanderers, left with the same feeling, as if they had just witnessed something sacred. Years passed. Owen Hale's dark brown hair slowly faded to silver, blending into the eternal white of Lapland's winter. Freya remained a creature of surreal beauty, her steps still as light as mist, her sapphire eyes still holding a treasury of calm and wisdom, too vast for any words to contain. Ember, though his muzzle had gone gray, was still the heartbeat of the home. His antics continued to make Owen laugh each day, that laughter echoing through the cabin like a short hymn to life. On a cool summer evening, the strange little family once again gathered on the porch, looking out across the valley. The old ritual, unchanged. Owen in his birchwood rocker, a steaming mug of herbal tea in his hand. Freya stretched out across the railing, a pale queen, surveying her frozen kingdom, from the shadowed forest to the mist-draped hilltops beyond. Ember curled at Owen's feet, his head resting against a worn boot, sleeping deeply, like a child who had never learned just how cruel the world could be. The sun set slowly, painting the Lapland sky in streaks of lavender and amber, a mirror of Ember's once fiery coat, now gently dimmed by time. Owen looked at the two beings who had walked into his life unexpectedly, carrying with them wildness, wonder, and something he never thought he'd find again. A home. They didn't replace the family he had lost. Nothing ever could, but they had built something new, on the very ruins he once tried to bury within himself. The true shock that day, years ago, wasn't just that they had refused to leave. It was the quiet, profound truth they revealed to Owen, to Dr. Halverson, and to anyone who had ever stood witness, that the deepest bonds in life are not formed by blood, species, or biological design. They are born of shared loss, unyielding loyalty, and a kind of love so powerful it can tame even the wildest hearts, whether beast or human. And in the still wilderness of Lapland, under the watchful gaze of ancient forests and snow-capped peaks, that extraordinary family was, and forever would be, home.